It's good to see you today. Appreciate you joining me. It is May 18th. Our reading today, our passages are Psalm 75 through Psalm 78. We are going to be looking in Psalm 78. There is a big change that happens in that Psalm 78 refers to, but Psalm 78 is more or less, it is very much a history of Israel. And you see who wrote it, Contemplation of Asaph. Give ear to my people, O my people, to my law. Incline your ears to the words of my mouth. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old. Just to get going a little bit so this isn't too long, because the chapter is one of the longer chapters. And I tell you what, we'll come back and we'll read this intro. But like I said, it very much is just a historic, the history of Israel up to that point. And it's not a good history. Verse 12. Verse 10. They did not keep the covenant of God. Marvelous things he did in the sight of their fathers. Talks about how they had forgotten. They forgot his works and his wonders that he had shown them. In verse 8 there. Pardon me, not verse 8, verse 11. But verse 12, it begins with the deliverance out of Egypt. He divided the sea and caused them to pass through, made waters stand up like a heap. Daytime he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink in abundance, like the depths. He says that they had forgotten how God had delivered them. And what an amazing thing. And the New Testament speaks about how that we cannot forget our deliverance, that we cannot forget that we ourselves were once also what we were once like without the Lord. But that Israel had forgotten. They had forgotten the power of God when they came through the Red Sea, and all of a sudden the waters are heaped up and they're walking across on dry ground. They had forgotten that the Lord had given them drink. And not only had they forgotten to look back at it, from verse 17, but they sinned even more against him by rebelling against the Most High in the wilderness. And they tested God in their hearts by asking for food, for the food of their fancy. Yes, they spoke against God. They said, can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rocks so that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can he give bread also? Can he provide meat for his people? Therefore the Lord heard this and was furious. They were not content. And they were actually testing God. They said, well, yes, he gave water, but can he give bread and meat too? And the answer to that is yes, God could, and God did. The next verses speak about the manna, and this is the passage. Psalm 78 is the passage where it speaks about that they ate angels' food, verse 25. And then it's the account of the quail, where he rains meat on them like dust. And it falls into the midst of their camp, and they ate, and they were filled, for he gave them their own desire. Verse 29, but while the food was still in their mouth, the wrath of God came against them. Struck down the choice men of Israel, verse 31. Verse 32, in spite of this, they still sinned, and did not believe in his wondrous works. Therefore their days he consumed in futility. And we're progressing through. So I would suggest this, he consumed in futility and their years in fear. Speaking about the wandering, I would suggest wandering in the wilderness all that time. He would discipline them and they would remember, yet at the same time they flattered him with their mouth. They lied to him with their tongue, for their heart was not steadfast. They had forgotten so much. They provoked him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert, verse 40. They tempted God and limited the Holy One of Israel. They did not remember his power. This next part is they forgot. They forgot what he did to Egypt. And these are all the things that Asaph is saying we need to teach our children so that our children can teach their children. But he goes through and he speaks about God's judgment on Egypt. He made a path in verse 50 for his anger and did not spare their soul from death, but gave their life over to the plague, destroyed all the firstborn in Egypt. He made his own people go forth like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock. Brought them to his holy border, this mountain which his right hand has acquired. He drove out the nations before them. He's doing all of this. But now notice, like I said, there's a big change coming. They provoked him, verse 58, they provoked him to anger with their high places and moved him to jealousy with their carved images. When God heard this, he was furious and greatly abhorred Israel. Okay, so they're in the promised land now. God, verse 55, drove out the nations before them, allotted them, and they are in Israel. The allotment has been made. And actually, where we are in the time of David. So, even here, as the allotments were made, they provoked him to anger with their high places and moved him to jealousy with their carved images. When God heard this, he was furious and greatly abhorred Israel. And then here's the change. So that he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had placed among men, and delivered his strength into captivity, and his glory into the enemy's hand. He also gave his people over to the sword and was furious with his inheritance. The fire consumed their young men, their maidens were not given in marriage. The priests fell by the sword. The widows made no lamentation. As you look at this passage, and let me move it down just a little bit more. Notice the change. Verse 67. Moreover, he rejected the tent of Joseph, and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. And he built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth, which he established forever. He also chose David his servant, and took him from the sheepfolds. From following the ewes that had young, he brought him to shepherd Jacob his people and Israel his inheritance. This business, this change that we're speaking about, he rejected the tent of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim. Earlier, as it speaks about the same idea, he forsook the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had placed among men. Most people think what this is referring to is, you remember when God was speaking to Samuel, the boy Samuel, and he says, I'm going to do something in Israel that when everybody hears it, their ears are going to tingle. He says they're not going to believe what's about to happen, because what's about to happen is God's people are going to be defeated and the Ark of the Covenant is going to be taken by the Philistines. And that is what these passages, it looks like that is what this is about. Because the Ark had been in Shiloh. But all of this build-up to this big change, God says, it's not going to be in Shiloh anymore. That time is past. Enough is enough. There's a phrase that's used here that Ephraim is like a deceitful bow. Namely, they ain't shooting straight. They're not shooting straight. They have not done what I wanted them to do consistently. And so the ark is not going to be in Shiloh anymore. It's coming down to Zion. And that's the change. And you have that picture when the ark finally comes in, where David is dancing, and you have all of those things happening. But all of that was happening because the ark had been in Shiloh, and then the Philistines steal it away, and you have that great transition happening. Right, as all of a sudden they reject God. Give us a king. We want to be like everyone else. Saul's appointed. Saul, that went real well, didn't it? And then God says, I'm going to choose a man after my own heart. And then finally the ark comes to Zion because God has rejected, as he speaks about here, the tabernacle of Shiloh. It's like it's not going to be there anymore. It's coming down. Back to the passage. Let's go back to the beginning. Like I said, Asaph, one of the leaders in the worship, as he was appointed, he says, I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known, and our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and his strength and his wonderful works that he has done. For he established a testimony in Jacob and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they may arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God, and that we better not forget. We better not forget our own deliverance. We better be content. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Don't test God. Don't forget God's judgments that have happened all down through history, going all the way back to the beginning. Do not forget God's judgments. That we simply cannot do it, and we cannot provoke God unto jealousy. We cannot do it. That we cannot do it ourselves, and we have to teach these things to our children so that they can teach them to their children. Otherwise, frankly, we're all doomed. And God can reject us just as he's rejected others in times past. So, hope the study's been helpful for you. It's definitely applicable, this psalm, but it's just kind of a learning from history. Those who don't learn from history, they repeat history. So, hope it's been helpful for you. I appreciate you following along with us today. Hope you're having a good day. Hope you join us for our next brief look into God's Word.